Lucinda Hadley clutched the locket around her neck as she stepped onto the creaky stage of the Silver Spur Saloon. The raucous crowd of miners and cowboys already hollering before she had shed a single piece of clothing. It was 1876 in Platteville, Colorado, 4 years since she'd been forced into this life, and 4 years too long. The piano player struck up a familiar tune, the tinny notes barely audible over the din of drunken men slamming their whiskey glasses and shouting crude suggestions. Lucinda forced her lips into what passed for a smile these days. Behind that smile, her mind wandered to the rolling hills of Missouri where she'd grown up, before her father's gambling debts had caught up with the family, before typhoid had taken both her parents within a week of each other, before she'd been left alone at 18 with nothing but a battered trunk and desperate hunger. "Get on with it, Lucy," shouted a red-faced miner, his beard wet with spilled liquor. "We ain't got all night." Lucinda began to sway, her movements mechanical after countless performances. She'd become numb to the humiliation, focusing instead on the coins that would be tossed onto the stage. Coins that meant another week of meals and rent for the tiny room above the general store. As she began to unlace her bodice, her eyes swept across the crowd, noting the usual faces until they locked on an unfamiliar one. He sat in the corner, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Unlike the others, he wasn't leering or shouting. He was simply watching, an untouched glass of whiskey before him. Something about his quiet intensity made her falter for a moment, breaking her carefully choreographed routine. "What's the matter, Lucy? Cat got your tongue?" Jeered another patron, and laughter rippled through the crowd. Lucinda recovered quickly, resuming her dance with practiced grace, but her eyes kept drifting to the stranger. As the music reached its climax and she removed the last layer that propriety would allow in even this rough establishment, she noticed the stranger stand up and walk out, leaving his drink behind. A strange disappointment washed over her, though she couldn't say why. He was just another man, after all. Another man in a town full of men who saw her as nothing more than entertainment to be bought. After her performance, Lucinda gathered the scattered coins from the stage, enduring the usual groping hands and propositions with practiced indifference. She had made it clear long ago that dancing was all she offered, despite Mr. Hargrove's, the saloon owner's, constant pressure to expand her services. Her steadfast refusal had earned her lower pay and the worst performance slots, but she had maintained this one small piece of dignity. The night air was crisp as she stepped outside the saloon, wrapping her worn shawl tightly around her shoulders. Platteville wasn't much of a town, a single street with a general store, a bank, the saloon, and a handful of other establishments, but it had been her prison for 4 years now. "Miss Hadley." The deep voice startled her, and she whirled around, one hand reaching for the small knife she kept concealed in her boot. The stranger from the saloon stood a respectful distance away, his hat now in his hands. In the moonlight, she could see his features clearly for the first time: strong jawline, piercing eyes, and a face weathered by sun and wind. "How do you know my name?" she demanded, not relaxing her defensive posture. "Heard them call you Lucy. Figured it was short for Lucinda. The barkeep mentioned your surname when I asked. You asked about me." Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Men who asked questions usually wanted something she wasn't willing to give. "I did." He took a step forward, then stopped when he saw her tense. "My apologies, madam. I'm being forward. My name is Daniel Jackson. I run cattle about 20 miles north of here." "And what business do you have with me, Mr. Jackson?" He seemed to consider his words carefully. "I'm in need of a housekeeper. My previous one returned east to care for her ailing mother. It's honest work, Miss Hadley." "Better pay than what Hargrove gives you, I'd wager." Lucinda gave a bitter laugh. I've heard that offer before, Mr. Jackson. The job always turns out to involve more than dusting and cooking. A flash of genuine offense crossed his face. I'm not that sort of man, Miss Hadley. I'm offering legitimate employment. My ranch hands take their meals in the bunkhouse. The main house needs tending, and I'm gone often enough that it sits empty much of the time. It's a respectable position. Why me? There must be plenty of women in town who'd jump at the chance. Not many willing to live so far from town. It can get lonely out there. He shifted his weight. And I've heard you're honest and hardworking despite your current occupation. Lucinda studied him carefully. There was something different about this man, a directness in his gaze that held neither pity nor lechery. Still, she had learned the hard way not to trust a man's words. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Jackson, but I don't know you, and you don't know me, despite whatever tales you've heard. He nodded, accepting her response. Fair enough. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded paper. My offer stands. Here's the address of my ranch and details of the position. Should you change your mind, I'll be in town until tomorrow noon. She hesitated before taking the paper, tucking it into her dress pocket without looking at it. Good evening, Miss Hadley. With that, he replaced his hat and walked away, his spurs making a rhythmic jingling sound against the wooden sidewalk. Lucinda watched him go, a strange feeling stirring within her. It had been so long since someone had spoken to her with respect, had offered her something other than crude propositions or disdainful glances. But experience had taught her that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. Back in her small room, Lucinda counted the night's earnings barely enough for another week. As she undressed for bed, the paper fell from her pocket. By lamplight, she read Daniel Jackson's neat handwriting. $20 a month plus room and board, Sundays off, duties to include cooking, cleaning, and managing household affairs. The wage was more than double what she made at the saloon, even in a good month. She folded the paper and placed it under her pillow, telling herself she was being foolish even to consider it. And yet, as she drifted off to sleep, she found herself picturing wide, open spaces instead of the same four walls that had contained her for years. Morning brought no clarity. Lucinda paced her small room, the paper clutched in her hand. Part of her yearned for escape from Hargrove, from the groping hands and leering eyes, from the prison of her own making. But another part remembered the last time she had trusted a man's promises. She had been 19 then, fresh from Missouri and desperate for work. The gentleman had offered her a position as a companion to his wife, only to reveal upon reaching his remote cabin that he had no wife, only intentions that still haunted her nightmares. She had escaped that situation only to find herself with even fewer options, eventually landing in Platteville and at the Silver Spur. At least here, surrounded by people, there was a certain safety in numbers, if not in reputation. The town clock struck 10. Daniel Jackson would be leaving in 2 hours. Lucinda made her decision, packed her meager belongings into the same battered trunk she'd arrived with, and made her way to the general store where Jackson had said he would be purchasing supplies. He was loading crates into a wagon when she approached, his back to her. The storekeeper noticed her first, his eyes widening in surprise to see Saloon Lucy out and about in daylight. "Mr. Jackson," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. He turned, momentary surprise giving way to a careful neutrality. "Miss Hadley, your offer, does it still stand?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "It does. Then I accept with conditions." She straightened her spine. "I want half my first month's wages in advance. And I want your word as a gentleman that if things aren't as represented, you'll bring me back to town immediately." Daniel Jackson considered her for a moment, then nodded. Those are fair terms." He reached into his vest pocket and counted out $10, handing them to her. "As for my word, Miss Hadley, I give it freely, though I hope in time you'll see it wasn't necessary." The storekeeper watched this exchange with undisguised curiosity, and Lucinda knew by nightfall the entire town would be buzzing with the news that Saloon Lucy had gone off with the cattle rancher from the north. "I need to collect my things and inform Mr. Hargrove of my departure." The latter would be unpleasant but necessary. "I'll be ready when you are," Jackson replied. "We should reach the ranch before sundown if we leave by noon." Hargrove's reaction was exactly as Lucinda had expected: red-faced rage followed by threats, then a calculating offer of more money when he realized she was serious. When none of that worked, he resorted to cruel remarks about her character and how she was fooling herself if she thought any respectable man would want her for anything but one purpose. "You'll be back," he sneered as she walked out. "When he's done with you, you'll come crawling back, and my offer won't be so generous then." His words followed her like a shadow as she made her way back to where Daniel Jackson waited with his wagon. The trunk was loaded, and with one last look at the dusty street that had been her prison for 4 years, Lucinda climbed up beside him. The journey was mostly silent, with Lucinda lost in her thoughts and Daniel seemingly content to let her be. The landscape changed as they traveled, the flat plains giving way to gently rolling hills covered with lush grass. "It's beautiful," she remarked as they crested a rise that revealed a wide valley below. "Best grazing land in Colorado," Daniel replied with evident pride. "My father claimed this land when I was just a boy. Said the moment he saw it, he knew this was where he wanted to build something lasting." "And did he build something lasting?" A shadow crossed Daniel's face. "He was killed during a cattle drive when I was 16. Stampede. But he taught me enough that I've managed to keep it going, even expand a bit." "I'm sorry about your father," Lucinda said softly. "It was a long time ago." Daniel pointed ahead. "There it is, Jackson Ranch." The house was larger than Lucinda had expected, 2 stories of solid construction with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. A barn and several outbuildings stood nearby, and in the distance she could see cattle grazing. It looked peaceful, prosperous even. "It's just you in the main house?" she asked as they approached. "Yes, my foreman, Bill Hayward, and the other hands live in the bunkhouse over there." He indicated a long, low building some distance from the main house. "They take their meals there too, except on special occasions. Mrs. Cooper, my previous housekeeper, used to cook for everyone at Christmas and such." As they pulled up to the house, a middle-aged man emerged from the direction of the barn. He had a weathered face and walked with a slight limp. "That's Bill," Daniel explained. "Been with the ranch since my father's time, knows more about cattle than any man alive." Bill approached the wagon, his expression curious as he took in Lucinda. "Boss, good to see you made it back." His eyes lingered on Lucinda, recognition dawning. "Miss." "Bill, this is Miss Hadley." "She'll be taking over as housekeeper," Daniel said, his tone making it clear that was all the explanation required. To his credit, Bill's face betrayed no judgment. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Hadley. We're glad to have help around here again. The boss can't cook worth a damn." Despite her nervousness, Lucinda found herself smiling. "Then I'll try not to disappoint." "Let me show you inside," Daniel said, helping her down from the wagon. "Bill, can you have one of the boys bring Miss Hadley's trunk up?" The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior, spacious rooms with solid furniture, worn but well maintained. There were signs of neglect: dust on the mantel, dishes stacked in the kitchen, but nothing that couldn't be rectified with some effort. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the right," Daniel said. "It has its own small stove for heat in the winter. The bathing room is at the end of the hall. We have a pump inside for water, something my father insisted on when he built this place. Said his wife shouldn't have to haul water from a well." "Your mother?" Lucinda asked. "She died when I was born. I never knew her." There was no self-pity in his statement, just a simple fact. "I'm sorry," she said again, feeling inadequate. "Nothing to be sorry for. It's just how life worked out." He showed her the rest of the house, the study where he kept the ranch books, the dining room used mainly for storage now, the pantry well stocked with basics. "I usually take breakfast early, around 5, dinner midday when I'm here, and supper around 7. Simple fare is fine. I'm not particular." Lucinda nodded, taking mental notes. "And my duties beyond cooking and cleaning. Nothing complicated. Keeping the house in order, managing household supplies. Sometimes I have business associates visit. You'd prepare meals for them too. Otherwise, your time is your own once your work is done. There's a small library in the study if you like to read." It all seemed so straightforward, so reasonable, that Lucinda kept waiting for the catch, the hidden expectation, the unspoken demand. But Daniel's manner remained respectful, his eyes never lingering inappropriately. "I'll leave you to get settled," he said. "I need to check on some things with Bill. If you're up to it, supper at 7 would be welcome, but if you need to rest after the journey, I can manage for myself tonight." "I'll have supper ready," Lucinda assured him, feeling a strange determination to prove her worth in this legitimate role. After Daniel left, a young ranch hand brought up her trunk. Alone in her new room, Lucinda sat on the bed and took a deep breath. The room was simple but comfortable: a bed with a proper mattress, a dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, a small writing desk by the window that overlooked the valley. It was more space than she'd had to herself in years. For the first time since leaving home, Lucinda felt a glimmer of hope. This might be just what Daniel Jackson had promised: honest work, a fresh start. Or it might be another disappointment, another painful lesson. Only time would tell. But for now, she had $10 in her pocket, a roof over her head, and work to do. That evening, she prepared a simple but hearty meal of bacon, beans, and biscuits, basic fare, but well executed with the supplies at hand. Daniel arrived precisely at 7, washed up, and sat at the kitchen table rather than the formal dining room. "This looks excellent," he said, serving himself. "You're already proving your worth, Miss Hadley. Please call me Lucinda," she said impulsively. "If we're to be living in the same house, formality seems unnecessary." He nodded. "Lucinda, then, and I'm Daniel." They ate in companionable silence for a while, Lucinda stealing glances at her new employer. Up close, she estimated him to be in his early 30s, with lines around his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun. His hands were calloused, a working man's hands despite his position as ranch owner. "May I ask you something, Daniel?" she ventured. "Of course." "Why did you really offer me this position? And please don't say it's because you needed a housekeeper. There must be women in town with better reputations who could do this job." Daniel set down his fork, considering her question. "I believe in second chances, Lucinda. Everyone has a past. What matters is what you do with your future." He paused. "Besides, I've observed you in town several times. You carry yourself with dignity despite your circumstances. That speaks to character. You've been watching me." Alarm crept into her voice. "Not in the way you're thinking," he clarified quickly. "I come to Platteville once a month for supplies. I've seen how you handle yourself, how you speak to people, even those who treat you poorly." Lucinda wasn't sure whether to be flattered or concerned that he had noticed her so carefully. "And you decided based on those observations that I would make a suitable housekeeper." I decided you deserved a better option if you wanted one." His directness was disarming. "The rest was up to you." After supper, Lucinda insisted on washing the dishes despite Daniel's protests that she could leave them until morning. It felt important to establish her role, to make clear that she took this position seriously. As she scrubbed the plates, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken in just one day. This morning, she had awakened in her tiny room, resigned to another performance at the Silver Spur. Tonight, she was 20 miles away, in a beautiful home, employed in respectable work. It seemed too good to be true. And experience had taught Lucinda that things that seemed too good to be true usually were. But as she prepared for bed in her new room, watching the stars through her window, she allowed herself a small measure of optimism. Perhaps, just perhaps, this time would be different. The following weeks established a routine. Lucinda rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Daniel, who would eat quickly before heading out to work with his men. She spent her days cleaning the neglected house, room by room, finding satisfaction in the transformation. Sometimes Daniel returned for the midday meal. Other times, he was out until evening, checking on distant parts of his property or dealing with business in neighboring towns. Bit by bit, the house came to life under Lucinda's care. She arranged wildflowers in vases, polished the long, neglected silver, and aired out rooms that had been closed up for months. The work was physically demanding but gratifying in a way that dancing never had been. Daniel proved to be an undemanding employer. He was quiet by nature, often absorbed in ranch business, but unfailingly polite and appreciative of her efforts. Sometimes in the evenings, they would sit in companionable silence, Daniel reviewing accounts in his study while Lucinda mended linens or read from his library. It was during one such evening, about a month after her arrival, that Daniel broke their comfortable silence. "The house hasn't looked this good since Mrs. Cooper was in her prime." "You've done wonders, Lucinda." She looked up from the book she was reading, pleased by the compliment. "Thank you. It's satisfying work. I never thought I'd enjoy keeping house, but there's something rewarding about creating order." "You were meant for better things than the Silver Spur," he said quietly. The direct reference to her past startled her. They had maintained an unspoken agreement not to discuss it. "We all end up places we never imagined," she replied carefully. "How did you come to be there?" he asked, then quickly added, "Forgive me. That's not my business." Lucinda closed her book, considering her response. Part of her wanted to maintain the boundary between them to keep her past private. But another part yearned to have someone understand her journey, to know that she hadn't chosen that path freely. "My father was a merchant in Missouri," she began, surprising herself. "Not wealthy, but we lived comfortably enough. Then the war came. He wasn't a soldier, but the fighting disrupted business. He started gambling to make up for lost income. When I was 17, both my parents died of typhoid within days of each other." Daniel set aside his ledger, giving her his full attention. "I discovered after their deaths that my father had amassed significant debts. Our home and business were seized. I had an aunt in Denver, so I set out to find her with what little money I had left." Lucinda's hands tightened on the book in her lap. "I never made it to Denver. The stagecoach was robbed, and I lost everything except the clothes on my back and this." She touched the locket at her throat. "It contains miniatures of my parents. The thieves didn't think it valuable enough to take." "How did you survive?" Daniel asked softly. "However I could," she said, unwilling to detail the desperate weeks that followed. "Eventually, I reached Platteville. Mr. Hargrove offered me work at the Silver Spur. At first, just serving drinks and cleaning up. But the money wasn't enough to live on, and he made it clear that dancing would pay more. And so you danced. And so I danced, she echoed. 4 years of it, always telling myself it was temporary, that I would save enough to leave to start over somewhere else. But there was never quite enough. Daniel was silent for a long moment. Thank you for telling me. Now you know I'm not some fallen woman who chose that life out of moral weakness. I never thought you were, he said simply. The sincerity in his voice made something shift inside Lucinda. For 4 years she had carried the weight of others' judgments, had seen the condemnation in their eyes without knowing her story. Daniel's quiet acceptance was like a balm to a wound she hadn't realized was still so raw. It's getting late, she said, rising from her chair. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Lucinda. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Lucinda felt lighter somehow, as if sharing even that small part of her history had lifted a burden. Daniel Jackson was unlike any man she had ever known, steady, honest, respectful. Dangerous qualities in a man, for they made it all too easy to lower one's guard, to begin to trust. And trust, Lucinda reminded herself as she prepared for bed, was a luxury she couldn't yet afford. The summer days stretched long and hot, the routine of ranch life providing a structure Lucinda had never known. She found unexpected pleasure in small things, the satisfaction of baking bread that filled the house with its aroma. The quiet mornings when she would sit on the porch with her coffee and watch the sun rise over the valley. The evenings when Daniel would occasionally share stories of the day's work. In July, Daniel announced that several business associates would be visiting to discuss a potential contract for Army beef. They'll stay 2 nights, he explained. 3 men plus the Army procurement officer. Can you prepare the guest rooms? Lucinda nodded, already mentally planning meals and arrangements. Of course. When will they arrive? Day after tomorrow. I apologize for the short notice. It's no trouble, she hesitated. Should I make myself scarce while they're here? I wouldn't want to cause any embarrassment if they recognize me from Platteville. Daniel looked genuinely puzzled. Why would you need to hide? You're my housekeeper. There's nothing improper about that. But if they know my history, then they'll have the good manners to keep it to themselves or answer to me, Daniel said firmly. You have nothing to be ashamed of, Lucinda. His confidence was touching, if perhaps naive. All the same, I'll keep to my duties and stay out of the way as much as possible. The visitors arrived as scheduled, their arrival turning the usually quiet ranch house into a hive of activity. Lucinda served meals, kept rooms tidy, and provided coffee and refreshments during their business discussions. She was careful to be efficient but unobtrusive, speaking only when spoken to. To her relief, none of the businessmen seemed to recognize her. The Army officer, Captain Morrison, was a stern man who barely acknowledged her presence. The others were polite but distant, treating her exactly as what she was, household staff. On the evening of the second day, as Lucinda cleared the dinner dishes, she overheard snippets of the men's conversation drifting from the study where they had retired with cigars and brandy. Substantial offer, Jackson. You'd be a fool to refuse. I appreciate the opportunity, gentlemen, but as I've said, I'm not interested in selling the ranch. Daniel's voice was firm. Every man has his price, another voice countered. What's yours? It's not about price, Daniel replied. This land was my father's legacy. I intend to honor that. Noble sentiment, came Captain Morrison's distinctive clipped tone. But sentiment doesn't build fortunes. The railroad's coming through these parts within 2 years. Land values will triple. If you sold now and invested the money wisely, you could live like a king. I live exactly as I please already, Daniel said, a hint of amusement in his voice. The conversation shifted and Lucinda moved away, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping. But the exchange stayed with her as she finished the kitchen tasks and prepared for bed. Daniel could sell the ranch and live comfortably elsewhere, perhaps in Denver or even back east. That he chose not to spoke of a devotion to his land and his father's memory that Lucinda found oddly moving. In a world where everything seemed to have a price, Daniel Jackson's steadfastness was remarkable. The visitors departed early the next morning after breakfast. As Lucinda cleared away the last of their presents, stripping beds and laundering linens, Daniel appeared in the doorway of the guest room she was cleaning. "You handled that admirably," he said. "They were very impressed with the meals and your efficiency." "I'm glad," she replied, continuing with her work. "Did you overhear much of our discussions?" Lucinda's hand stilled. "I wasn't intentionally listening, but yes, I heard some. They want you to sell the ranch." "They do." Daniel leaned against the doorframe. "They represent Eastern investors looking to consolidate land holdings before the railroad arrives. They've been buying up ranches all across the territory." "But not yours." "No," he confirmed, "not mine. Because of your father," Daniel seemed to consider this. "Partly. But also because this is home. I've lived other places, tried other things. Nothing felt right except being here." Lucinda understood that sentiment all too well, the yearning for a place to belong, to call home. She had lost hers and spent years drifting. Daniel had found his and was determined to keep it, regardless of potential profit. "I admire that," she said softly, "knowing what you want and standing firm." A slight smile touched his lips. "Even if others think it foolish, especially then." She returned to her task, smoothing fresh sheets onto the bed. "Will there be more visitors soon?" "Not for a while. But there's the harvest dance in Platteville next month. As a major landowner, I'm expected to attend. Would you care to accompany me?" The invitation caught Lucinda entirely off guard. She straightened, staring at him. "Return to Platteville? As your—" "What exactly?" Daniel seemed to realize belatedly how his invitation might sound. "As my housekeeper, of course. My companion for the evening in a perfectly respectable capacity. Mrs. Cooper used to accompany me to these functions." "Mrs. Cooper was a widow in her 60s, Lucinda pointed out. "I'm a former saloon dancer. People would talk." "People always talk," he said dismissively. "I thought you might enjoy an evening out, a change of scenery. But if you'd prefer not to, I understand completely." The thought of returning to Platteville made Lucinda's stomach tighten with anxiety. To walk into that town on Daniel Jackson's arm, to face the stares and whispers, the judgment in eyes that had seen her in a very different capacity, it was terrifying. And yet, part of her was tempted by the opportunity to show that she had moved beyond that life, that she had found respectable employment and a measure of dignity. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Daniel nodded, accepting her non-answer. "Take all the time you need." "It's not for several weeks yet." After he left, Lucinda sat heavily on the freshly made bed. The invitation troubled her, not just because of the prospect of returning to Platteville, but because it suggested a shift in her relationship with Daniel. An employer taking his housekeeper to a social function, regardless of how he framed it, would raise eyebrows and questions. More concerning was her own reaction, the flutter of something like pleasure at the thought of spending an evening with Daniel in a context other than their daily routine. Such feelings were dangerous. Daniel was her employer, her benefactor in many ways. Any confusion of those boundaries could jeopardize the security she had only just begun to build. And yet, as the weeks passed and the harvest dance drew nearer, Lucinda found herself increasingly inclined to accept. Perhaps it was time to face her past directly, to return to Platteville not in shame, but with her head held high. Daniel had given her the chance to redefine herself. Maybe this was an opportunity to embrace that new identity publicly. The decision was made for her when, 3 weeks before the dance, a letter arrived for Daniel. Lucinda recognized the handwriting on the envelope, Mr. Hargrove's distinctive scrawl. She placed it on Daniel's desk with the rest of the mail, trying to quell her rising anxiety. That evening, Daniel sought her out in the kitchen where she was preparing supper. "Did you see the letter from Hargrove?" he asked without preamble. "I noticed his handwriting," she admitted. "What does he want?" Daniel's expression was grim. "He claims you stole money from him before leaving. He's threatening to press charges unless I return you to Platteville or pay him $50 in compensation." Lucinda's hands shook with sudden fury. "That's a lie. I never stole anything from him or anyone else." "I know that," Daniel said calmly. "I never for a moment believed his claim." His immediate trust eased some of her distress. "What will you do?" "I thought we might ride into Platteville together tomorrow and settle this matter directly, if you're willing." The prospect filled Lucinda with dread, but she nodded. "I won't hide from his lies. I'll face him." The journey to Platteville the next day was tense, with Lucinda growing more anxious as the familiar buildings came into view. Daniel drove the wagon, occasionally glancing her way with concern. "We'll go straight to the sheriff's office," he said as they entered the town. "Get this cleared up properly." But word of their arrival seemed to spread instantly. By the time they reached the main street, people were already watching from doorways and windows. Lucinda kept her eyes forward, refusing to acknowledge the stares, though she could hear the murmurs. "That's Lucy from the Silver Spur, with Jackson from the north. Heard she's living at his ranch now." The sheriff, a grizzled man named Tanner who had always been fair in Lucinda's experience, met them at his office door. "Mr. Jackson, Miss Hadley, been expectin' you might show up after Hargrove started running his mouth all over town." "Then you've heard his accusations," Daniel said, helping Lucinda down from the wagon. "I've heard him. Don't put much stock in him, to be honest. Hargrove's never been one for the truth when a lie would serve him better." Sheriff Tanner held the door open for them. "Come on in. We'll sort this out." Inside the sheriff's office, they found Mr. Hargrove already waiting, his florid face showing a mix of triumph and calculation. He sneered when he saw Lucinda. "Well, if it ain't the thief herself. Come to confess, have you?" "Watch your tongue, Hargrove," Daniel warned, his voice low and dangerous. Sheriff Tanner raised a hand for calm. "Let's all settle down. Mr. Hargrove, you've made a serious accusation against Miss Hadley. I need specific details. When exactly did this theft occur, and what evidence do you have?" Hargrove's story was flimsy at best. He claimed to have discovered money missing from his cash box the day after Lucinda left, with no witnesses or proof beyond his word that she had access to it. As he spoke, his tale grew more elaborate, with details that contradicted each other. When he finished, Sheriff Tanner turned to Lucinda. "Miss Hadley, what do you have to say to these charges?" "They're completely false," Lucinda stated firmly. "I never had access to Mr. Hargrove's cash box. He kept it locked in his office and only he had the key. I received my pay directly from him each night after my performance. I never handled any other money from the establishment." "She's lying," Hargrove sputtered. "She must have stolen my key, made a copy, with what skills or tools," Daniel interrupted. "Miss Hadley is not a locksmith." Sheriff Tanner rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "Mr. Hargrove, without witnesses or evidence, this is just your word against hers. And frankly, your story has more holes than a sieve." "Are you calling me a liar?" Hargrove demanded. "I'm saying you haven't given me reason to believe your accusation," the sheriff replied evenly. "Without evidence, there's no basis for charges." Hargrove's face darkened with rage. "This is outrageous." She worked for me for 4 years, then suddenly runs off with him. He jabbed a finger at Daniel, and the same day, money goes missing. What more evidence do you need? The truth would be a start, Daniel said coldly. You're not concerned about missing money, Hargrove. You're angry that Miss Hadley found employment elsewhere and left you without your main attraction. The saloon owner's eyes narrowed. Is that what you think she's doing at your ranch? Employment? He gave a crude laugh. We all know what she's really providing up there, all alone with you. At least at my establishment, she was honest about what she was selling. Before anyone could react, Daniel had Hargrove by the collar, lifting him partially out of his chair. Apologize to Miss Hadley. Now. Sheriff Tanner moved quickly between them. That's enough. Mr. Jackson, I understand your anger, but I can't have fighting in my office. He turned to Hargrove. As for you, there's no evidence to support your claim of theft. But if you continue spreading these accusations around town, I'll have you up on charges of slander. Am I clear? Hargrove straightened his rumpled shirt, glaring at all of them. Crystal clear, Sheriff, but this ain't over. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The sheriff sighed heavily. I apologize for that unpleasantness, Miss Hadley. You're free to go. There's no case here. Thank you, Sheriff, Lucinda said quietly. Outside, the townspeople had gathered in small groups, watching with undisguised curiosity. Lucinda held her head high as she and Daniel walked back to their wagon, ignoring the whispers. I'm sorry you had to endure that, Daniel said as he helped her up. It's not your fault. Hargrove was bound to try something like this. She glanced around at the familiar buildings, feeling strangely detached from the town that had once been her prison. Could we stop at the general store before we leave? There are some supplies we need. Daniel looked surprised but nodded. Of course. The general store fell silent as they entered, the customers staring openly at Lucinda. Mrs. Peterson, the storekeeper's wife, bustled forward with a forced smile. Mr. Jackson, lovely to see you. What can we help you with today? While Daniel engaged Mrs. Peterson in conversation about flour and coffee, Lucinda moved through the store, selecting items they needed with quiet efficiency. She was examining spools of thread when she became aware of someone standing nearby. Lucy. The soft voice belonged to Ellie, one of the other dancers from the Silver Spur. She was a young woman, barely 20, with tired eyes that had seen too much. Hello, Ellie, Lucinda replied, keeping her voice neutral but not unkind. Is it true? You're working as a housekeeper for Jackson. Ellie's voice was tinged with both skepticism and hope. It's true. Honest work, fair pay. Ellie glanced over at Daniel, who was still occupied with Mrs. Peterson, and he doesn't expect anything else. Lucinda shook her head. No, he's a good man, Ellie. There aren't many of those, Ellie murmured. Then, after a pause, I'm glad for you, Lucy. Really. The sincerity in the younger woman's voice touched Lucinda. Thank you, and Ellie. There are other options, other paths, if you ever want to try. Ellie gave a sad smile. Maybe someday. She squeezed Lucinda's hand briefly, then drifted away as Daniel approached. Everything all right? He asked, noticing Lucinda's expression. Yes, she said, returning her attention to the thread. Just seeing an old acquaintance. They completed their purchases and left town, the weight of the day's events hanging between them. It wasn't until they were well on their way back to the ranch that Lucinda broke the silence. I'd like to accept your invitation to the harvest dance, she said suddenly. Daniel glanced at her in surprise. After today, are you certain? Because of today, she corrected. I won't let Hargrove or anyone else make me feel ashamed or drive me into hiding. If I'm to have a new life, I need to claim it fully, not skulk around as if I've done something wrong. A slow smile spread across Daniel's face. I admire your courage, Lucinda Hadley. "It's not courage," she replied. "It's survival, and perhaps a touch of defiance." The day of the harvest dance arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp air, golden sunlight, and trees beginning to show hints of color. Lucinda had spent the previous week altering one of her better dresses, a dark blue cotton that she had rarely worn at the Silver Spur because it was too modest for her performances. With careful work, she had updated it with new trim and adjusted the fit to current fashions. As she dressed for the evening, pinning up her hair in a simple but elegant style, Lucinda fought against rising nerves. This would be her first social event in Platteville indeed, anywhere as something other than Saloon Lucy. The significance of the moment was not lost on her. Daniel was waiting at the foot of the stairs when she descended, dressed in his best suit, his usually unruly hair tamed and his beard neatly trimmed. He stared at her for a long moment before speaking. "You look beautiful, Lucinda." The simple compliment, delivered with such evident sincerity, brought a flush to her cheeks. "Thank you. You clean up rather nicely yourself." The drive to Platteville was filled with golden light as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Daniel spoke of inconsequential things, the weather, the cattle, the coming winter, as if sensing her nervousness and trying to distract her. "We don't have to stay long if you're uncomfortable," he assured her as they approached the town. "Just make an appearance, have a dance or two, and we can leave." "I'll be fine," Lucinda said with more confidence than she felt. "Besides, I haven't danced properly with a partner, in years. I might enjoy it." The town hall had been transformed for the occasion with harvest decorations, corn stalks, pumpkins, and autumn leaves adorning the walls and tables. A small band played lively tunes in the corner, and most of Platteville's residents were already present, the women in their best dresses and the men looking uncomfortable in stiff collars. Their entrance caused a brief lull in conversation, heads turning to stare at the unlikely pair, the prosperous rancher and the former saloon dancer. Then, with the resilience of small-town social gatherings, the chatter resumed, though Lucinda could feel the weight of curious glances. Daniel offered her his arm, leading her into the hall with a confidence that helped steady her nerves. "Shall we greet the hosts?" Mayor Simmons and his wife were receiving guests near the refreshment table. Mrs. Simmons, a formidable woman who had never deigned to acknowledge Lucinda's existence before, now gave her a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Jackson, so pleased you could join us." She barely glanced at Lucinda. "What a surprise! To see you've brought a companion." "Miss Hadley is currently employed as my housekeeper," Daniel said smoothly, "but this evening she's here as my guest. I believe you're acquainted." The deliberate introduction forced Mrs. Simmons to acknowledge Lucinda directly. "Miss Hadley," she said stiffly. "How nice, Mrs. Simmons," Lucinda replied with perfect politeness. "You've arranged a lovely event." As they moved away, Daniel leaned close to whisper in her ear, "Handled with grace. Well done." Throughout the evening, Lucinda endured similar encounters: cold politeness from the women, poorly concealed leers from some of the men who had seen her perform at the Silver Spur, and outright curiosity from everyone. But with each interaction, she found her confidence growing. She was no longer the desperate girl who had arrived in Platteville 4 years ago. She had survived, found a path forward, and no one could take that from her. Daniel remained steadfastly by her side, introducing her without qualification or explanation, treating her with the same respect he showed to the most prominent citizens. When Hargrove appeared, his face darkening at the sight of them, Daniel simply steered Lucinda in another direction, sparing her a confrontation. "Would you care to dance?" he asked as the band struck up a waltz. Lucinda hesitated only briefly. "I'd like that." The floor cleared slightly as they took their positions, giving them more space than strictly necessary, whether out of respect for Daniel or discomfort at Lucinda's presence. She couldn't tell. But when Daniel's hand settled respectfully at her waist, and he led her into the dance with surprising grace for a man who spent his days on horseback, Lucinda found she didn't care what anyone else thought. "You dance well," she observed as they moved through the steps. "My father insisted I learn, said a man should know how to behave in all kinds of company." He guided her through a turn. "Though I admit I'm outmatched by my partner tonight." "Different kind of dancing," Lucinda said with a small smile, "but I did have proper lessons as a girl. My mother thought it essential for a young lady's education." As they continued to dance, Lucinda became aware of a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The initial shock of her presence was wearing off, and people were beginning to observe them with something more like interest than scandal. She caught snippets of conversation. "They make a handsome pair," and never seen Jackson so attentive that suggested perceptions were already changing. By the time they took a break for refreshments, several other men had worked up the courage to approach and ask Lucinda for a dance. She accepted a few, mindful that each acceptance further normalized her presence, transforming her from Saloon Lucy to simply Miss Hadley, Mr. Jackson's housekeeper. Near the end of the evening, as Lucinda returned to Daniel's side after a polka with the blacksmith's son, she was startled to see Ellie from the Silver Spur hovering nearby, looking uncertain in a borrowed dress that was too large for her slight frame. "Ellie," Lucinda greeted her warmly. "I didn't know you were coming tonight." "I wasn't planning to," Ellie admitted, "but after seeing you in town the other day, I thought maybe." She trailed off, her courage failing. Daniel, sensing the moment, stepped forward with a gentle smile. "Miss Ellie, is it? I'm Daniel Jackson. Would you care to join us for some punch?" His simple kindness, extending the same courtesy to Ellie that he had shown to Lucinda, brought tears to Lucinda's eyes. This was the measure of the man, not grand gestures, but small acts of decency that recognized the humanity in everyone, regardless of their circumstances. Later, as they drove home under a canopy of stars, Lucinda found herself reflecting on the evening with a sense of accomplishment. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Daniel glanced at her, the moonlight casting shadows across his features. "I didn't do anything extraordinary." "You did," she insisted. "You treated me like a person of value publicly when it would have been easier not to." "You have no idea what that means." He was silent for a long moment, guiding the horses through the darkness. "I've always seen your value, Lucinda. From the first time I observed you in town, handling difficult situations with dignity. I just provided an opportunity for others to see it too." The simple statement, delivered without artifice or expectation, touched something deep within Lucinda, a part of her heart she had walled off years ago for protection. In that moment, under the vast Colorado sky, she allowed herself to acknowledge what she had been feeling for weeks. She was falling in love with Daniel Jackson. The realization was terrifying. He was her employer, her benefactor. Their stations in life, their histories, their circumstances, everything created barriers between them. And yet, the feelings refused to be denied. Lucinda turned her face away, grateful for the darkness that hid her expression. This was her secret to keep, her burden to bear. Daniel had given her a new life, respect and dignity. She would not complicate that gift with unwelcome emotions. As fall deepened into winter, life at Jackson Ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. The days grew shorter, the nights colder, and the work shifted from the land to indoor tasks. Daniel spent more time at home, managing the ranch accounts and planning for the spring, while Lucinda kept the house warm and welcoming. In the evenings, They often sat by the fire in the study, Daniel reading agricultural journals or working on correspondence while Lucinda sewed or read from his library. These quiet hours became precious to her, a domestic contentment she had never imagined possible. Sometimes they would talk about books, about the ranch, about the news from town that Daniel brought back from his trips. Occasionally, he would share stories from his youth or ask about her life before Platteville. Never prying, always respectful of her boundaries, but gradually building a deeper understanding between them. Lucinda found herself opening up more than she had with anyone in years, sharing memories of her childhood in Missouri. Her dreams before life had taken such unexpected turns. Daniel listened with genuine interest, offering insights from his own experience without judgment or platitudes. One snowy evening in December, as they sat before a crackling fire, Daniel broke their companionable silence with an unexpected question. "Do you ever think about what you might want beyond this, Lucinda?" She looked up from her mending, puzzled. "Beyond what?" "Beyond being a housekeeper. If you could choose any future for yourself, what would it be?" The question caught her off guard. For so long, her horizons had been limited to immediate survival, the next meal, the next roof over her head. The luxury of imagining a different future had seemed pointless. "I haven't thought about it," she admitted. "For years, just escaping the silver spur was my only goal. Now that I have." She paused, considering. "I suppose I might like to have my own small business someday. A millinery shop, perhaps, or a dress shop. I've always been good with my hands." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "You have talent. I've seen your needlework." "It's a nice dream," she said with a small shrug. "But it would require capital I don't have." "Dreams have a way of becoming possible with time and effort," Daniel said. "The money you're saving now could be a start." Lucinda hadn't considered that her current position might be a stepping stone rather than a destination. The idea that Daniel saw it that way, that he envisioned her moving beyond being his housekeeper, brought a mixture of emotions. Hope for such possibilities, but also a pang at the thought of leaving Jackson Ranch, leaving him. "What about you?" she asked, turning the question back on him. "What do you dream of beyond the ranch?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Who says the ranch isn't my dream?" "No one who's seen you with your cattle," she conceded. "But is that all?" Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. "I've always wanted to build something lasting, something that could be passed down. My father started that work and I've continued it. But a legacy needs heirs." He stared into the fire. "Someday I'd like a family. Children to teach and watch grow, a wife to share this life with." The words hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Lucinda's hands stilled on her mending, her heart beating faster despite her efforts to remain composed. "You'd make a good father," she said softly, keeping her eyes on her work. "Patient, kind." "High praise," he replied, his voice equally quiet. "And you? Do children figure in your future dreams?" "Once, long ago," she admitted. "Before Platteville, after, I thought that door had closed. What decent man would want a former saloon dancer as the mother of his children?" The moment the words left her mouth, Lucinda regretted them. They revealed too much, made her vulnerability too apparent. She rushed to change the subject. "The hour is late. I should retire." "Lucinda, good night, Daniel." She gathered her sewing and fled upstairs, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. In her room, Lucinda stood before the small mirror on her dresser, studying her reflection. At 22, she was still young, still beautiful despite the hardships she had endured. But her eyes held shadows, remnants of experiences that had aged her beyond her years. What decent man would want her? The question echoed in her mind, along with an answer she dared not acknowledge even to herself. The man sitting downstairs by the fire, the man who had seen her at her lowest and still treated her with respect, the man she had grown to love against all reason and caution. December brought heavy snows that blanketed the ranch in pristine white, isolating them from town and visitors. Christmas approached, and Lucinda threw herself into preparations, decorating the house with evergreen boughs and making special treats from recipes her mother had taught her. On Christmas Eve, they exchanged modest gifts by the fire: a new woolen scarf Lucinda had knitted for Daniel, and for her, a beautiful leather-bound journal and pen set. "I thought you might want to write down those dreams of yours," Daniel explained as she ran her fingers over the fine paper. "Make them more tangible." "It's too generous," she protested. "This must have been expensive. Please accept it," he said simply. "It gives me pleasure to give you something that might bring you joy." Lucinda's throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you, I'll treasure it." The moment felt weighted with significance, with words unsaid and feelings unexpressed. Daniel seemed about to speak further when a commotion outside interrupted them: the sound of a horse approaching at speed, unusual in the dark and snow. Daniel went to the window, peering out into the night. "Someone's coming. In this weather it must be urgent." He grabbed his coat and went to the door, Lucinda following with a lantern. Through the swirling snow they could make out a rider dismounting, leading his exhausted horse toward the porch. "Bill," Daniel called, recognizing his foreman. "What's wrong?" Bill Hayward staggered up the steps, his face red with cold. "Sorry to disturb you on Christmas Eve, boss, but there's trouble. Just got word from town. Hargrove's been telling everyone you're harboring a thief. He's convinced the bank to call in your loan early, claiming you're an unreliable risk because of your association with Miss Hadley." Lucinda gasped. "He can't do that. He's friendly with the bank manager's wife," Bill explained grimly. "And he's been spreading all kinds of tales about what goes on at this ranch." Daniel's jaw tightened. "When is the loan due?" "New Year's Day. If you can't pay in full by then, the bank will begin proceedings to seize the property." Lucinda felt sick with guilt. Daniel was in danger of losing his ranch, his father's legacy, his life's work because of her, because Hargrove couldn't accept that she had escaped his control. "How much?" Daniel asked, his voice steady despite the shocking news. $5,000, Bill replied. "I know you don't have that kind of cash on hand, boss, not after the investments in new breeding stock this year." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "No, I don't, but I have some options. Thank you for riding out in this weather to warn me, Bill. Get yourself warm in the bunkhouse. We'll talk strategy in the morning." After Bill left, Daniel closed the door against the cold and turned to Lucinda. The festive mood of moments ago had vanished, replaced by a heavy tension. "This is my fault," Lucinda said, unable to keep the distress from her voice. "Hargrove is doing this to punish me, to punish you for helping me." "This is Hargrove's doing, not yours," Daniel corrected firmly, "and he won't succeed. But the ranch, your home, can be saved." He guided her back to the fire, his hand gentle on her arm. "Lucinda, listen to me. I have options. I can sell some cattle, perhaps even that parcel of land to the east that I've been holding on to. It will be tight, but I can raise the money. Or you could simply return me to Platteville," she said quietly. "That's what he wants. If I go back, perhaps he'll withdraw his influence with the bank." Daniel's expression hardened. "That is not an option. I won't sacrifice you to appease a vindictive bully." The vehemence in his voice surprised her. "But your ranch is important to me," he acknowledged. "But so are you." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, its implications too profound to ignore. Lucinda stared at him, her heart pounding. "Daniel." He took her hands in his gaze intent. "I should have said this weeks ago, months ago, perhaps. Lucinda, I care for you deeply. Not as an employer for a housekeeper, but as a man cares for a woman he admires, respects, and loves. The words seemed to echo in the quiet room. Lucinda felt tears spring to her eyes, emotions too complex for words welling up within her. "You can't," she whispered. "My past, my history, are part of what made you the woman you are," he finished. "The woman I love. Strong, resilient, kind, despite every reason not to be." "The town will never accept it," she protested. "You'll be ostracized, your business dealings affected." "You've seen how they look at me, how they talk. Let them talk." Daniel's hands tightened around hers. "I've never cared much for other people's opinions, and I care even less when they're wrong. The question isn't what the town will think, Lucinda. It's what you feel." Lucinda closed her eyes, overwhelmed. For so long she had guarded her heart, convinced that her past had closed off certain futures forever. The possibility that Daniel might truly love her, might choose her despite everything, was almost too much to comprehend. "I can't let you sacrifice everything for me," she said finally. "The ranch is your heritage, your future." "I'm not sacrificing anything," he insisted. "I'm fighting for what matters most. The ranch, yes, but also you. Both are part of the future I want." He paused, studying her face. "But I need to know if that's a future you want too." In that moment, with the snow falling outside and the fire crackling beside them, Lucinda made her decision. She had spent years being defined by circumstances beyond her control, by the judgments and expectations of others. It was time to claim her own path. "I love you," she said, the words both terrifying and liberating. "I've loved you for months, but I never dared to hope." Daniel's kiss cut off her words, gentle but insistent, a promise and a question all at once. She responded with all the emotion she had kept carefully contained for so long, allowing herself to believe, finally, that a different life was possible. When they pulled apart, Daniel rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "We'll face Hargrove together. And whatever comes after, we'll face that too." The days between Christmas and New Year's passed in a flurry of activity. Daniel rode to neighboring ranches, negotiating sales of cattle at fair prices to raise the money needed. Lucinda put her savings modest, but growing over the months of her employment at his disposal, an offer he accepted with gratitude but promised to repay. By New Year's Eve, they had assembled most of the required sum through a combination of cattle sales, Lucinda's savings, and loans from 2 neighboring ranchers who respected Daniel and despised Hargrove's underhanded tactics. They were still short by several $100s, but Daniel remained confident. "We'll go to the bank tomorrow and present what we have," he told Lucinda as they sat by the fire on New Year's Eve. "The bank manager is a businessman at heart. Once he sees we have most of the money and a clear plan for the remainder, he should be reasonable." "And if he's not?" Lucinda couldn't help asking. Hargrove's influence ran deep in Platteville. "Then we'll find another way," Daniel said with the calm determination that had first attracted her to him. Together. New Year's Day dawned clear and cold, the sun glinting off snow-covered fields as they rode into Platteville. The town was quiet, most residents still recovering from the previous night's celebrations. Lucinda sat tall beside Daniel in the wagon, dressed in her best, her resolve firm despite her nervousness. The bank was open for limited hours on the holiday, specifically to handle loan payments due on the 1st of the month. The manager, Mr. Peterson, no relation to the storekeeper, received them in his office with a carefully neutral expression. "Mr. Jackson, Miss Hadley." He nodded to each of them. "I assume you're here about the loan." "We are," Daniel confirmed, placing a heavy pouch on the desk. $4,700, Mr. Peterson. That's most of the amount due. For the remaining $300, I propose a structured payment plan over the next 3 months. Peterson's eyebrows rose slightly. I'm impressed you managed to raise so much on such short notice, Mr. Jackson. But as you know, the terms of the recall require payment in full today. The terms of the recall were artificially imposed based on false information provided by Mr. Hargrove, Daniel countered calmly. Information regarding Miss Hadley's character which has been proven untrue. Sheriff Tanner can verify that. Be that as it may, Mr. Peterson, Lucinda interrupted, surprising both men. May I speak frankly? The banker hesitated, then nodded. We all know why this loan was recalled. Mr. Hargrove is using his influence to punish me for leaving his employment, and to punish Mr. Jackson for hiring me. It has nothing to do with financial risk, and everything to do with personal vendetta. Peterson shifted uncomfortably, but didn't deny it. I understand that you have a business to run, Lucinda continued. But consider this. If word gets out that the bank makes loan decisions based on personal grudges rather than sound financial principles, how will that affect the confidence of other customers? Mr. Jackson has been a reliable borrower for years. His ranch is profitable. Foreclosing over a mere $300 would be seen for exactly what it is, a capitulation to Hargrove's manipulation. The banker glanced between them, clearly reassessing the situation. You make a compelling point, Miss Hadley. However, rules are rules. Then perhaps we can make it easier for you to follow them, came a voice from the doorway. They turned to see Ellie standing there, accompanied by 3 other women from the Silver Spur. Each held a small pouch. We heard what Hargrove was doing, Ellie explained, stepping forward. And we wanted to help. She placed her pouch on the desk. It's not much, we don't make what we deserve at the Silver Spur, but together we've got about $200 here. Lucinda stared at her former colleagues in astonishment. Ellie, you can't, we want to, one of the other women said firmly. You got out, Lucy. You showed us it's possible, that's worth something. Daniel stood, deeply moved by their gesture. Ladies, I'm truly grateful. But I can't take your hard-earned money. It's not for you, Ellie clarified with a small smile. It's for Lucy, for what she represents to us. Hope. As they stood there in the banker's office, Daniel, Lucinda, and the women from the Silver Spur presenting a united front, the door opened again. Sheriff Tanner entered, followed by several prominent townspeople, including Mayor Simmons. Heard there might be some trouble at the bank today, the sheriff said casually. Thought I'd stop by to make sure everything's proceeding fairly. As did we, Mayor Simmons added, unusually solemn. Jackson Ranch is an important part of our community and our economy. It would be a shame to see it endangered over a relatively small sum. Peterson looked increasingly uncomfortable with the growing audience. This is a private business matter that affects the public interest, the mayor finished. He reached into his pocket and withdrew an envelope. The town council took a vote last night. We're offering an official loan to cover any shortfall in Mr. Jackson's payment, at fair interest, of course. It's good business for the town. Lucinda could scarcely believe what was happening. These were the same people who had once looked through her as if she didn't exist, who had whispered behind her back. Now they were standing with them against Hargrove's machinations. Peterson, recognizing the shift in power, adjusted quickly. Well, with the town's guarantee, I see no reason why we can't accept Mr. Jackson's proposed payment plan for the remaining balance. He began counting the money on his desk. In fact, with Miss Ellie's contribution, it seems the shortfall is now only $100, which is a much more manageable amount. Make it nothing, came another voice. Bill Hayward had slipped into the increasingly crowded office. The hands took up a collection, boss. We've got the last $100 here. He placed a small sack on the desk. Ranch wouldn't be the same without you at the helm. Daniel looked around at the assembled group, his friends, neighbors, employees, and most of all, Lucinda standing proud beside him. The tide had turned, not just for his loan but for how the town viewed both him and Lucinda. "I'm grateful to all of you," he said simply. "More than I can express." The loan was paid, the paperwork signed, and as they left the bank, Lucinda felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Not just the threat to the ranch, but the burden of her past, the shame she had carried for so long. The town hadn't forgotten her history, but they had chosen to see beyond it, to recognize her worth as the person she was now. Outside in the winter sunshine, Daniel took her hand publicly, a declaration of his intentions for anyone to see. "Shall we go home?" he asked. Home. The word had never sounded so sweet. Spring came to the Colorado countryside, turning the world green and vibrant after the long winter. The ranch flourished under Daniel's management, and Lucinda found herself transitioning from housekeeper to partner in all but name. She kept the books now as well as the house, her natural head for figures proving an asset to the business. In town, attitudes continued to evolve. There would always be those who judged her for her past, but increasingly, Lucinda was accepted as Miss Hadley from Jackson Ranch, rather than Lucy from the Silver Spur. The change was subtle but profound, a shift in identity that reflected her inner transformation. On a warm May evening, Daniel took Lucinda riding to a hilltop overlooking the ranch, where wildflowers carpeted the ground and the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. They dismounted, and Daniel spread a blanket for them to sit and enjoy the view. "It's beautiful up here," Lucinda observed, gazing out at the land that had become her home. "I can see why you love it so much." "My father used to bring me here when I was a boy," Daniel said, sitting beside her. "He said you could see the whole world from this spot, or at least, the only world that mattered." Lucinda smiled, understanding the sentiment. After years of hardship and uncertainty, she had found her place in this world with this man, Lucinda. Daniel's voice grew serious as he took her hand. "I've been waiting for the right moment, and I think it's here. On this hill where my father taught me to dream big dreams, I want to share mine with you." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Lucinda's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring with a modest diamond. "It was my mother's," he explained. "My father gave it to her when they claimed this land, promising to build a life worthy of her. I want to make you the same promise." He held the ring out to her. "Lucinda Hadley, will you marry me? Will you build that life with me as my wife, my partner, my love?" Tears filled Lucinda's eyes, not of sorrow but of overwhelming joy. From the desperate young woman who had danced for survival to the confident woman who now helped manage a thriving ranch, her journey had been long and often painful. But it had led her here, to this moment, to this man who had given her not charity but choice, not rescue but respect. "Yes," she whispered, her heart full. "Yes, Daniel, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the setting sun cast long shadows across the valley below, shadows like the ones in her past, present but no longer defining her. Ahead lay a future of her own choosing, with a man who loved her for exactly who she was. In the end, it wasn't Daniel who had given Lucinda the choice to stop dancing. It was Lucinda herself who had found the courage to accept that choice, to claim a different life. And in doing so, she had discovered not just love, but something equally precious, the freedom to write her own story. They were married in June in a simple ceremony on the ranch, with Bill Hayward as best man and Ellie, who had recently left the Silver Spur to work at the general store as Lucinda's attendant. The townspeople came, even Mrs. Simmons with her tight smile that had gradually softened over the months. Hargrove was notably absent, having left Platteville shortly after his scheme to seize the ranch failed, his business declining as his reputation soured. As Daniel and Lucinda exchanged vows under the Colorado sky, surrounded by the land they both loved and the community that had finally embraced them, Lucinda reflected on the strange and winding path that had brought her here. 4 years of dancing for survival had given way to a lifetime of dancing for joy, with a partner who matched her step for step. And as they moved into the future together, Lucinda kept a journal, the one Daniel had given her that Christmas, filled with dreams that were no longer distant hopes but daily realities. Dreams of home, of family, of love that had withstood judgment and hardship to emerge stronger. Dreams that continued to unfold with each passing season on the land that had become her sanctuary, with the man who had become her heart's home.